This screencast will take a look at the cultural hearth of ancient China. And as you go through this page on the website and this video, please make sure to be answering the questions in blue with your group and preparing this information for your group presentation. Neolithic people of East Asia probably domesticated rice sometime about 7000 BCE, and by 5000 BCE, rice had become the staple diet in the Yangtze River Valley. You can see in this map the area we're talking about. First of all, on the world here, it's this part in red, which is the country now we call China, and more specifically, you can see in this area of the map the region we're discussing. In later centuries, the people farther north around the Yellow River domesticated wheat, barley, and eventually millet, which is small seed grasses, that had probably arrived from Mesopotamia. After about 3000 BCE, villages along both rivers communicated and traded with others throughout the region, and by 1700 BCE, they had established cities and complex political, cultural, and social systems that served as the foundation for civilization in China and other parts of East Asia. And again, be sure you're answering these blue questions as we go. Geographical influences. Ancient China rose in a part of the world that was a long way away from other civilization. Although trade did exist between China and others, distance and geographic barriers separated the areas so that in many ways, East Asia developed independently from others. Both agriculture and metalworking were independently invented in China. The Yellow and Yangtze River valleys were rich with river silt soil and were good for agriculture, where much of the rest of the land that became China was less inhabitable, meaning people couldn't really live there. The Gobi Desert stretched to the north and the west of the rivers. The Himalaya Mountains lay to the southwest, and the vast Tarim Basin, high, dry, and cold, occupied the west. You can see here this map of the geography of China. These geographic features have shaped the development of Chinese civilization, and even today, the vast majority of China's population lives in the east along the rivers and coastline. The rivers absorbed a yellowish-brown dust, giving the Yellow River its name, from Central Asia, so that it formed loess, a thick mantle of fertile and soft soil, easy enough to be worked with wooden digging sticks. East Asia rivers were prone to irregular flooding, and people responded by building dikes, channels, and basins to store river water and rainfall. Economic development. The Yellow River was so prone to unpredictable flooding that Chinese leaders and farmers had to come up with a solution to control it. Great irrigation systems were developed, and dikes too, in order to control the flow of the river. An important innovation was the hoe for farming, and later the four-pronged hoe was developed. This made agriculture more productive and allowed support of a larger population. Ancient China's growth was also spurred by mastery of metalworking, metallurgy, mainly the production of bronze weapons and tools. The ruling elites controlled access to metals and employed craftsmen to make weapons. Another important development was silk manufacturing. The Chinese learned to raise silkworms on mulberry trees and carefully unraveled their cocoons to make silk thread. See a picture here on the left of a silkworm. Cities were centers of political control and religion and were surrounded by great walls of hardened earth. Large public buildings were constructed, such as palaces, political centers, storehouses, royal tombs, shrines of gods, and ancestors, and houses of the nobility. Ordinary people lived in villages outside the city walls. The cities were laid out on a grid plan aligned with the North Polar Star. The gates open to the cardinal directions, and all major buildings face the south. Political development. By the 18th century BCE, the areas in the north and west of the Huanghe River were home to many nomadic groups who followed domesticated animals from pasture to pasture. People who were settled and practiced agriculture often came into conflict with these nomads, which occurred for thousands of years to come. The first distinctive culture that has been proved through written records was the Shang dynasty, which conquered most other tribes. The dynasty lasted about 700 years. The political system emerged from the need to control the great flood of the river, but the Shang tribe was still nomadic, and the leaders were warrior kings who fought on horseback with very effective bronze weapons. Their armies were made up of other subject people, and the other warrior leaders swore loyalty to the Shang rulers. The king was seen as a link to a supreme being, Shangdi, and ordinary mortals, so the power he had was significant. Most of the people were governed by vassals, who served the king and were bound to him by personal ties. These vassals collected tribute, payment usually in the form of produce, which supported the ruler and his court. Under later dynasties, ancient China developed professional bureaucrats, or shi, men of service. These administrators were the best educated men in the empire, and they served as scribes, clerks, advisors, and overseers, both in the king's court and the subordinate governments of the king's vassals. They specialized in keeping records, running public works or wars, and organizing rituals and ceremonies. Social characteristics. In ancient China, there were three main social groups. The elite is the first one. This is the royal family and allied or friendly noble families. They enjoy great prestige and economic benefit. The landowners and educated bureaucrats form this top group as well. Secondly, the peasants, free artisans, and craftsmen. Peasants owned no land but worked the land that belonged to the nobility. Peasants were overworked and worked on big projects such as canals, roads, and buildings, in addition to field work. Artisans and craftsmen worked almost always in the city, in comfortable houses. Finally, unskilled workers and slaves. These people had the lowest status and performed hard labor, but ancient China was not dependent on slave labor for production. And cultural developments. Organized religion did not play an important role in the development of ancient China like it did in other civilizations. They recognized the will of heaven, but did not recognize personal gods who controlled human life, and there was not a great priestly class. A few priests assisted in royal rituals, but connections between family members on earth and their ancestors who had passed on were a very important element of heaven. Rulers and family patriarchs were interested in consulting the ancestors for guidance, and made use of oracle bones, specially prepared broad bones or turtle shells, each inscribed with a question. When properly heated, the bones would crack, and the shamans, individuals who claimed the ability to contact ancestors, would interpret the communication by the patterns formed. Many of these oracle bones have survived, and they tell us a great deal about Chinese society and beliefs. Chinese writing was pictograph, a standardized picture of an object. Written Chinese did not include an alphabet, but pictographs were combined to represent abstract ideas. Another early use of writing in China was the development of philosophy, with the Confucianism being the most famous. Values and beliefs are reflected in the works that have survived, including the Analects, a collection of Confucianism. So don't forget to go through and answer the questions in blue with your group, and continue working on your group presentation on ancient China.